it's nice and warm. The climates of that southern brand. But one thing I don't understand. They've got a gal there, a pretty gal there, colder than an Arctic storm. She's got a heart that's made of stone. Even the Iceman leaves her alone. They call her hard-hearted Hannah, Ram of Savannah, the meanest gal in town. Leather is tough, but Hannah's heart is tougher. She's a gal that likes to see men suffer. To love them and thrill them, to torture and to kill them is dirty life, they say. Found her at the seashore with a great big pan. There was Hannah pouring water on a drowning man. They call her hard-hearted Hannah, Savannah, Savannah, G.A. They call her hard-hearted Hannah, Savannah, Savannah, the meanest gal in town. Talk about your cold refrigerating mamas. Brother, she's a polar bear's pajamas. To love them and thrill them, to torture and to kill them is dirty life, they say. An evening spent with Hannah, sitting on your knees, is like traveling through Alaska in your PVD. They call her Hannah, the land of Savannah, G.A. We talking about Daytona Beach.
What are you talking about, Savannah bands?
They call her hard-hearted Hannah, the land of Savannah, G.A.
Yeah. All right, we're back with Donna Tartt, the little friend, obviously, since it's emblazoned upon our life here. This is still chapter 2, which is rather long. We're in the page 109 when we pick up. Turn on the lighter so we can get some better lighting. Harriet's great aunt Adelaide was an indefatigable housekeeper. Unlike her sisters, whose small houses were crammed to the rafters with books, curio cabinets, and bric-a-brac, dress patterns, and trays of nasturtiums, as started from seed and maidenhair ferns clawed to tatters by cats, Adelaide kept no garden, no animals, hated to cook, and had a mortal dread of what she called clutter. She complained that she was unable to afford a housekeeper, which infuriated Tat and Edie, as Adelaide's 3 monthly Social Security checks, courtesy of 3 dead husbands, kept Adelaide far better fixed for money than they were. But the truth was that she enjoyed cleaning. Her childhood in decayed tribulation had given her a horror of disorder, and she rarely felt happier than when she was washing curtains, ironing linens, or bustling around her bare, disinfectant-smelling little house with a dust rag and a spray can of lemon furniture polish. Usually, when Harriet dropped by, she found Adelaide vacuuming the carpets or cleaning out her kitchen cabinets, but Adelaide was on the sofa in the living room, pearl air clips, her hair rinsed tasteful ash blonde, freshly permed, her nylon legs crossed at the ankle. She had always been the prettiest of the sisters, and at 65 she was the youngest too. Unlike timid Libby, Valkyrie Edith, or nervous, scatterbrained Tat, there was an undertow of flirtatiousness about Adelaide. A roguish sparkle of the merry widow, and a 4th husband was not out of the question. Should the right man, some natty, balding gent in a sports jacket with oil wells, perhaps, or horse farms, unexpectedly present himself in Alexandria and take a shine to her. Adelaide was poring over the June issue of Town and Country magazine which had just arrived. She was looking now at the weddings. Which of these two do you reckon has the money? She asked Harriet, showing her a photograph of a dark-haired young man with frosty, haunted eyes standing alongside, a shiny-faced blonde in a bustled hoop skirt that made her look like a baby dinosaur. The man looks like he's about to throw up. I don't understand what it is. What is all this business about blondes? Blondes have more fun and all that. I think that's something people dreamed up on the television. Most natural blondes have weak features, and they look washed out and rabbity unless they take a lot of pains to fix themselves up. Look at this poor girl. Look at that one. She has a face like a sheep. I wanted to talk to you about Robin, said Harriet, who saw no use in edging gracefully up to the subject. What's that you're saying, sweet? Said Adelaide, eyeing a photograph of a charity ball. A slender young man in black tie, clear, confident, on his face, was rocking back on his heels with laughter, one hand at the back of a sleek little brunette in sugar pink ball gown, and elbow gloves to match. Robin, Addie. Oh, darling, said Adelaide wistfully, glancing up from the handsome boy in the photograph. If Robin was with us now, he'd be knocking the girls over like Skittles. Even when he was just a tiny thing, so full of fun. He'd tip over backwards sometimes with laughing so hard. He liked to sneak up behind me and throw his arms around my neck and nibble on my ear, adorable, like a parakeet named Billy Boy that Edith used to have when we were children. Adelaide trailed away at the smile of the triumphant young Yankee, caught her eye again. As the smile of the triumphant young Yankee caught her eye again. College sophomore, the caption said. Robin, if he was alive, would be about the same age now. She felt a flutter of indignation. What right did this F. Dudley Willard, whoever he was, have to be alive and laughing in the Plaza Hotel with an orchestra playing in the Palm Court and his glossy girl in a satin gown laughing back at him? Adelaide's own husbands had fallen respectively to World War II, and accidentally fired bullet during hunting season, had massive coronary. She had borne 2 stillborn boys by the first, and her daughter with the second had died at 18 months of smoke inhalation when the chimney of the Old West 3rd Street apartment caught fire in the middle of the night. Savage blows, knee buckling, cruel. Yet moment by painful moment, breath by painful breath, one got through things. Now, when she thought of the stillborn twins, she remembered only their delicate and perfectly formed features, their eyes closed peacefully as if sleeping. Of all the tragedies in her life, and she had suffered more than her share, nothing lingered and festered with quite the rankness of little Robin's murder, a wound that never quite healed but gnawed and sickened and grew, ever more corroding with time. Harriet observed her aunt's faraway expression. She cleared her throat. I guess this is what I came over to ask you, Adelaide, she said. I always wonder if his hair would have darkened when he got older, said Adelaide, holding up the magazine at arm's length to examine it over the tops of her reading glasses. Edith's hair was mighty red when we were little, but not as red as his. True red. No orange about it. Tragic, she thought. Here were these spoilt Yankee children prancing around the Plaza Hotel, while her lovely little nephew, superior in all respects, was in the ground. Robin had never even had the chance to touch a girl. With warmth, Adelaide thought of her 3 ardent marriages and the cloakroom kisses of her own full-handed youth. What I wanted to ask you is if you had any idea who might have. He would have grown up to break some hearts, darling. Every little child tri-delt at Ole Miss would be fighting over who got to take him to the debutante assembly in Greenwood. Not that I put much stock in that debutante foolishness, all that blackballing and cliques and petty. Rap, rap, rap. A shadow at the screen door. Addie? Who's there? Called Adelaide, starting up. Edith? No, this is the Satanic Bible. Darling, said Teddy Coram, bursting in, wild-eyed, without even looking at Harriet, tossing her patent leather handbag into an armchair. Darling, can you believe that rascal Roy Dial from the Chevrolet place wants to charge everybody in the ladies' circle $60 apiece to ride to Charleston on the church trip? On that broken down school bus. $60, shrieked Adelaide. He said he was lending the bus. He said it was free. He's still saying it's free. He says the $60 is for gasoline. That's enough gasoline to drive the Red China. Well, Eugenie Monmouth's calling the minister to complain. Adelaide rolled her eyes. I think Edith should call. I expect she will. When she hears about it, I'll tell you what Emma Carradine said. He's just trying to make himself a big profit. Certainly he is. You'd think he'd be ashamed of himself, especially with Eugenie and Lisa, or is it Liza, and Susie Lee and the rest of them living on Social Security. Now, if it was $10 I could understand. And Roy Dial, supposedly such a big deacon and all, $60, said Adelaide. She got up and went over to the telephone table for pencil and notebook and began to figure. Goodness, I'm going to have to get the atlas out for this, she said. How many ladies on the bus? 25, I think, now that Mrs. Taylor's dropped out and poor old Mrs. Newman McLemore fell and broke her hip. Hello, sweet Harriet, said Tat, swooping to kiss her. Did your grandmother tell you? Our church circle is going on a trip. Historic Gardens of the Carolinas. I'm awfully excited. I don't know that I care to go now that we've got to be paying all this exorbitant fee to Roy Dial. He ought to be ashamed. That's all there is to it, with that big new house out in Oak Lawn and all those brand new cars and Winnebagos and boats and things. I wanted to ask a question, said Harriet in despair. It's important, about when Robin died. Addie and Tat stopped talking at once. Adelaide turned from the road atlas. Their unexpected composure was so jarring that Harriet felt a surge of fright. You were in the house when it happened, she said in the uncomfortable silence, the words tumbling out a little too fast. Didn't you hear anything? The two old ladies glanced at each other, a small beat of thoughtfulness, during which some unspoken communication seemed to pass between them. Then Taddy took a deep breath and said, No, nobody heard a thing. And do you know what I think? She said as Harriet tried to interrupt with another question. I don't think this is a very good subject for you to go around casually bringing up with people. But you haven't bothered your mother or your grandmother with any of this, have you? Adelaide said stiffly, I don't think this is a very good topic of conversation either. In fact, she said over Harriet's rising objections, I think it might be a good time for you to run along home, Harriet. Healy, half blinded by sun, sat sweating on a brush-tangled creek bank, watching the red and white bobber of his cane pole flicker on the murky water. He had let his night crawlers go because he thought it might cheer him up to dump them onto the ground in a big creepy knot, to watch them squirming off or digging holes in the ground or whatever, but they did not realize that they were free of the pail, and after disentangling themselves, wove around placidly at his feet. It was depressing. He plucked one off his sneaker, looked at its mummy-segmented underside, and then flung it into the water. There were plenty of girls at school prettier than Harriet and nicer, but none of them were as smart or as brave. Sadly, he thought of her many gifts. She could forge handwriting, teacher handwriting, and compose adult-sounding excuse notes like a pro. She could make bombs from vinegar and baking soda, mimic voices over the telephone. She loved to shoot fireworks, unlike a lot of girls who wouldn't go near a string of firecrackers. She had got sent home in second grade for tricking a boy into eating a spoonful of cayenne pepper, and 2 years ago she had started a panic by saying that the spooky old lunchroom in the school basement was a portal to hell. If you turned off the light, Satan's face appeared on the wall. A gang of girls trooped downstairs giggling, switched the lights out, and burst forth completely off their heads and screaming with terror. Kids started playing sick, asking to go home for lunch, anything to keep from going down in the basement. After several days of mounting unease, Mrs. Millie called the children together, and along with tough old Mrs. Kennedy, the sixth grade teacher, marched them all to the empty lunchroom, girls and boys crowding in behind them, and switched off the light. See, she said scornfully, now don't you all feel silly? At the back, in a thin, rather hopeless-sounding voice, which was somehow more authoritative than the teacher's bluster, Harriet said, He's there. I see him. See, cried a little boy's voice. See, gasp, then a howling stampede. For sure enough, once your eyes got used to the dark, an airy greenish glow, even Mrs. Kennedy blinked in confusion, shimmered in the upper left corner of the room. And if you looked long enough, it was like an evil face with slanted eyes and a handkerchief tied over the mouth. All that uproar about the lunchroom devil, parents phoning the school, demanding meetings with the principal, Baptist teachers or preachers jumping on the bandwagon too, Church of Christ and Baptists, a flutter of bewildered and combative sermons entitled Devil Out and Satan in our schools. All this was Harriet's doing, the fruit of her dry, ruthless, calculating little mind. Harriet, though small, she was ferocious on the playground, and in a fight, she fought dirty. Once, when Fay Gardner tattled on her, Harriet had calmly reached under the desk and unfastened the oversized safety pin that held her kilt skirt together. All day she had waited for her opportunity, and that afternoon, when Fay was passing some papers out, she struck out like lightning and stabbed Fay in the back of the hand. It was the only time Healy had ever seen the principal beat a girl. 3 licks with the paddle, and she hadn't cried. So what? She said coolly when he complimented her on the way home from school. How could he make her love him? He wished he knew something new and interesting to tell her, some interesting fact or cool secret, something that would really impress her, or that she would be trapped in a burning house or have robbers after her, so he could rush in like a hero and rescue her. He had ridden his bicycle out to this very remote creek, so small it didn't even have a name. Down the creek bank was a group of black boys not much older than he was, and further up, several solitary old black men in khaki trousers, rolled up at the ankle. One of these, with a styrofoam bucket and a big straw sombrero embroidered in green with souvenir of Mexico, was now approaching him cautiously. "Good day," he said. "Hey," said Healy warily. "Why you dump all these good night crawlers on the ground?" Healy couldn't think of anything to say. "I spilled gasoline on them," he said at last. "That's not going to hurt them. The fish going to eat them anyway. Just wash them off." "That's all right. I help you. We can just muddle them around in the shallow water right here. Go on and take them if you want them." Dryly, the old man chuckled, then stooped to the ground and began to fill his bucket. Healy was humiliated. He sat staring out at a hook in the water, munching morosely on boiled peanuts from a plastic bag in his pocket and pretending not to see. How could he make her love him, make her notice when he wasn't there? He could buy her something, maybe, except he didn't know anything she wanted, and he didn't have any money. He wished he knew how to build a rocket or a robot, or throw knives and hit stuff like at the circus, or that he had a motorcycle and could do tricks like Evel Knievel. Dreamily, he blinked out across the creek at an old black woman fishing on the opposite bank. Out in the country one afternoon, Pemberton had shown him how to work the gear shift on the Cadillac. He pictured himself and Harriet speeding up Highway 51 with the top down. Yes, he was only 11, but in Mississippi, you could get a driver's license when you were 15, and in Louisiana, the age was 13. Certainly, he could pass for 13 if he had to. They could pack a lunch, pickles and jelly sandwiches. Maybe he could steal some whiskey from his mother's liquor cabinet, or failing that, a bottle of Dr. Titchener's, which it was antiseptic and tasted like shit, but it was 140 proof. They could drive to Memphis, up to the museum, so she could see the dinosaur bones and shrunken heads. She liked that kind of thing, educational. Then they could drive downtown to the Peabody Hotel and watch the ducks march across the lobby. They could jump on the bed in a big room and order shrimp and steaks from room service and watch television all night long. No one to stop them from getting in the bathtub, too, if they felt like it. Without their clothes on, his face burned. How old did you have to be to get married? If he could convince the highway patrol that he was 15, surely he could convince some rickety porch. No. How old did you have to be to get married? If he could convince the highway patrol that he was 15, surely he could convince some preacher. He saw himself standing with her on some rickety porch in Oak County. Harriet in that red checkered short set she had, and he in Pem's old Harley Davidson t-shirt, so faded that you could hardly read the part that said, "Ride hard, die free." Harriet's hot little hand burning in his, and now you may kiss the bride. The preacher would have lemonade afterwards. Then they would be married forever and drive around in the car all the time and have fun and eat fish he caught for them. His mother and father and everybody at home would be worried sick. It would be fantastic. He was jolted from his reverie by a loud bang, followed by a splash and high, crazy laughter. On the opposite bank, confusion. The old black woman dropped her pole and covered her face with her hands as a plume of spray burst from the brown water. Then another and another. The laughter, frightening to hear, rang from the little wooden bridge above the creek. Healy, bewildered, held his hand up against the sun and saw two white men, indistinct. The larger of the two, and he was much larger, was simply a massive shadow slumped in hilarity, and Healy had only a confused impression of his hands dangling over the rail, big dirty hands with big silver rings. The smaller silhouette, cowboy hat, long hair, was using both hands to aim a glinting silver pistol down at the water. He fired again, and an old man upstream jumped back as the bullet kicked up a white spray of water near the end of his fishing line. On the bridge, the big guy threw back his lion's mane of hair and crowed hoarsely. Healy saw the bushy outline of a beard. The black kids had dropped their poles and were scrambling up the bank, and the old black woman on the opposite bank limped light and fast after them, holding her skirts up with one hand, an arm outstretched, crying, "Get a move on, Grandma." The gun sang out again, echoes ricocheting off the bluffs, chunks of rocks and dirt falling into the water. Now the guy was just shooting every which way. Healy stood petrified. A bullet whistled past and struck up a puff of dust next to a log where one of the black men lay hidden. Healy dropped his pole and turned to bolt, sliding, nearly falling, and ran as fast as he could for the underbrush. He dived into a patch of blackberry bushes and cried out as the brambles scratched his bare legs. As another shot rang out, he wondered if the rednecks could see from that distance that he was white, and if they could, whether they'd care. Harriet, poring over her notebook, heard a loud wail through the open window, and then Allison screaming from the front yard, "Harriet, Harriet, come quick!" Harriet jumped up, kicking the notebook under her bed, and ran downstairs and out the front door. Allison stood on the sidewalk crying with her hair in her face. Harriet was halfway down the front walk before she realized the concrete was too hot for her bare feet, and leaning to one side, off balance, she hopped on one foot back to the porch. "Come on, hurry. I have to get some shoes. What's going on?" Ida Rue yelled from the kitchen window. "Why y'all carrying on out there?" Harriet thumped up the stairs and slapped down them again in her sandals. Before she could ask what was wrong, Allison, sobbing, dashed forward and seized Harriet's arm and dragged her down the street. "Come on, hurry, hurry." Harriet stumbling along. The sandals were hard to run and scuffed behind Allison as fast as she could, and then Allison stopped, still weeping, and flung her free arm out at something squawking and fluttering in the middle of the street. It was a moment or two before Harriet realized what she was looking at. A blackbird, one wing stuck in a puddle of tar. The free wing flapped frantically. Harriet, horrified, saw right down the creature's throat as it screamed, down to the blue roots of its pointed tongue. "Do something," cried Allison. Harriet didn't know what to do. She started toward the bird, then pulled back in alarm as the bird shrieked piercingly and battered its lopsided wing at her approach. Mrs. Fountain had shuffled out on her side porch. "You all leave that thing alone," she called in a thin, peevish voice, a dim form behind the screen. "It's nasty." Harriet, her heart striking fast against her ribs, grabbed at the bird, flinching as if making feints at a hot coal. She was scared to touch it, and when its wing tip brushed her wrist, she snatched her hand back in spite of herself. Allison screamed, "Can you get it loose?" "I don't know," said Harriet, trying to sound calm. She circled around to the back of the bird, thinking it might quiet down if it couldn't see her, but it only screamed and struggled with renewed ferocity. Broken quills bristled through the mess, and Harriet saw with a sick feeling glossy red coils that looked like red toothpaste. Trembling with agitation, she knelt on the hot asphalt. "Stop it," she whispered as she eased both hands toward it. "Hush, don't be afraid." but it was scared to death, flapping and floundering, its fierce black eye glinting bright with fear. She slipped her hands underneath it, supporting its stuck wing as best as she could, and wincing against the wing, beating violent in her face, lifted up. There was a hellish screech, and Harriet, opening her eyes, saw that she'd ripped the stuck wing off the bird's shoulder. There it lay in the tar, grotesquely elongated, a bone glistening blue out the torn end. "You'd better put it down," she heard Mrs. Fountain call. "That thing's going to bite you." The wing was completely gone. Harriet realized, stunned, as the bird fought and struggled in her tarry hands. There was only a pumping, oozing red spot where the wing had been. "Put that thing down," called Mrs. Fountain. "You're going to get rabies. They have to give you the shots." "Hurry, Harriet," cried Allison, plucking at her sleeve. "Come on, hurry, let's take it to Edie." But the bird gave a spasmodic shudder and went limp in her blood-slick hands, the glossy head drooping. The sheen of its feathers, green on black, was as brilliant as ever. But the bright black glaze of pain and fright in its eyes had already dulled to a dumb incredulity, the horror of death without understanding. "Hurry, Harriet," cried Allison. "It's dying. It's dying." "It's dead," Harriet heard herself say. "What's wrong with you?" shouted Ida Rue to Healy, who had just run in through the back door past the stove where Ida, sweating, stood stirring the custard for a banana pudding. Through the kitchen, pounded up the stairs to Harriet's room, leaving the screen door to slam shut behind him. He burst into Harriet's bedroom without knocking. She was lying on the bed, and his pulse, already racing, quickened at the arm flung over her head and the hollow white armpit, the dirty brown soles of her feet. Though it was only 3:30 in the afternoon, she had her pajamas on, and her shorts and shirt, with something sticky and black smeared all over them, lay wadded on the rug beside the bed. Healy kicked them out of the way and plumped himself, panting, at her feet. "Harriet," he was so excited he could hardly talk. "I got shot at. Somebody shot me." "Shot you?" With a sleepy creak of a bed springs. Harriet rolled over and looked at him. "With what?" "A gun." "Well, they almost shot me. I was on the bank, see, and pow! There's this big splash, water." Frantically, he fanned the air with his free hand. "How can somebody almost shoot you?" "I'm not kidding, Harriet. A bullet went right by my head. I jumped in some sticker bushes to get away. Look at my legs." He broke off in consternation. She was leaning back on her elbows, looking at him, and her gaze, though attentive, was not at all commiserating, or even very startled. Too late, he realized his mistake. Her admiration was hard enough to win, but going for sympathy would get him nowhere. He sprang from his seat at the foot of her bed and paced over to the door. "I threw some rocks at them," he said bravely. "I yelled at them, too. Then they ran off." "What were they shooting with?" said Harriet. "A BB gun or something?" "No," said Healy after a slight, shocked pause. How could he make her grasp the urgency of this, the danger? "It was a real gun, Harriet. Real bullets. Mm-ms running everywhere." He flung out an arm, overwhelmed with the difficulty of making her see it all. The hot sun, the echoes of the bluff, the laughter and the panic. "Why didn't you come with me?" he wailed. "I begged you to come. If it was a real gun they were shooting, I think you were stupid to stand around throwing rocks." "No, that's exactly what you said." Healy took a deep breath, and then all of a sudden he felt limp with exhaustion and hopelessness. The bed springs whined as he sat down again. "Don't you even want to know who it was?" he said. "It was so weird, Harriet, just this. Weird." "Sure I want to know," said Harriet, but she didn't seem too worried or anything. "Who was it, some kids?" "No," said Healy, aggrieved. "Grown-ups, big guys, trying to shoot the corks off the fishing poles." "Why were they shooting at you?" "They were shooting at everybody. It wasn't just me. They were—" He broke off as Harriet stood up. For the first time, Healy took in fully her pajamas, her grimy black hands, the smeared clothes on the sun-soaked rug. "Hey, man, what's all this black mess?" he inquired sympathetically. "Are you in trouble?" "I tore a bird's wing off by mistake." "Yuck, how come?" said Healy, forgetting his own troubles for the moment. "He was stuck in some tar. He would have died anyway, or a cat got him." "A live bird?" "I was trying to save him." "What about your clothes?" She gave him a vague, puzzled glance. "That won't come off. Not tar. Ida's going to whip your ass." "I don't care. Look here, and here. It's all over the rug." For several moments, there was no noise in the room except the whir of the window fan. My mother has a book at home that tells how to take out different stains, said Healy in a quieter voice. I looked up chocolate one time when I left the candy bar on a chair and it melted. Did you get it off? Not all the way, but she would have killed me if she'd seen it before. Give me the clothes. I can take them to my house. I bet Tar's not in the book. Then I'll throw them away, said Healy, gratified at finally having got her attention. You're nuts if you put them in your own garbage can. Here. And he circled to the other side of the bed. Help me move this so she won't see it on the rug. Z of rug. And I believe there's a long passage coming up, so I'm stopping at this point. Yes. A 10-page, 7-page passage. All right, Robs, that's all. Goodbye. Goodbye.